Let's get Joseph Lindsley on here from Ukraine. Joe, I was thinking about the war that you're in the middle of there and what's going on in Israel. And besides the problem of rooting out Hamas terrorists hiding underneath hospitals, the Israel situation is in a way more difficult than what's going on there in Ukraine, because if you defeat Hamas, how do you defeat the idea of Hamas? And obviously there where you are in Ukraine, I mean, the people are united. They want their country back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Bob, hello from Kyiv. And this is a vital and essential question. A big difference here is that, in the case of Ukraine, you have the Russian nation supported by the Russian government, or the people who support the government in Russia. Their mission is to destroy Ukraine and Ukrainians. That's long been a goal of the Russian Empire going back for centuries. It's an ideology. It's like a religion. But that's only Russians. And it's a huge country, of course, but it's just Russia. And in the case of Israel, Hamas is sort of the spearhead of many people around the world, as we've seen in many of these protests, who want the destruction not only of Israel, but of the Jewish people. And so in that sense, it's a much more difficult struggle for the Israelis, and they have such a small country for themselves, the Jewish people for themselves. They established that country precisely for protection after the Holocaust and after centuries of oppression. And I was thinking about this very question today. Once again, it's a calm day here in Kyiv. Russia still has had no major response to that September 22nd Ukrainian hit upon the Black Sea Fleet headquarters. As many here believe, Russia's victory plan at this moment is to wait, to let the world forget while Ukraine slowly bleeds out. And there were Russian drones sent over the Khmelnytsky region in western Ukraine last night. So we always have these small, acts of destruction. I talked with foreign soldiers yesterday who've been at the edges, and I hear about their successes, but also how very difficult it is. How they need more resources, they need more thermal visions in order to do so much more. And so, at the micro level, it's very difficult. In the city of Nikopol, on the reservoir, right, it's a frontline city right across from the largest nuclear plant in Europe. I heard from friends. There were a woman there who runs a volunteer group. She said, Kyiv has had almost 2 months of pretty much silence in the skies. But in Nikopol, she says, we do not remember what silence means because they are pounded now day and night by the Russians. I just heard from friends from the NGO called Solidarity and Evolution. They do so much to help the people who are still in that city of Nikopol. And one of their top volunteers, Sergei, was killed by a drone. Just taking a walk in the streets, you could easily be killed at any moment. So at the micro level, the destruction is immense, but there is this, the Ukrainians have achieved something, and the Russians are not sending these long-range missiles. And when I was taking a run today, and quiet day, no air alarms at the moment, and I saw there's one main big boulevard on a ridge in Kyiv, and at one end is St. Sophia, one of the oldest churches in Europe. It's over 1,000 years old. It's really the home of Slavic Christianity. Beautiful gold and green domes. And then at the other end of this little boulevard is St. Michael's Golden Domed Monastery, which actually it was an ancient place, but it was destroyed by the Soviets in 1935. And it was rebuilt after Ukraine got its freedom. And I think about those two temples, as they call them here in Ukrainian, though they were Christian churches. St. Sophia is, because it is the heart of Slavic Christianity, Moscow wants it, because Moscow was created 200 years after that church was built. And Moscow's always been desperate, going back to the days of the czars and the dukes of Moscow, desperate for some credibility to give it historical meaning as a nation. And so they want these, St. Michael's they didn't care about, they destroyed it, but they want this landmark, St. Sophia, to for some sort of ideological reason. And partly because of that, it's currently not a church. In Free Ukraine, they sort of preserve it as a museum because there were so many political tensions. But in many other ancient Christian sites here, Ukrainians are, up until Russia's full-scale invasion, ironically, Ukrainians were not even in the free times of Ukraine, they were not able to use and go to these churches. They were still controlled by Moscow. And, the Moscow Orthodox Church was recreated by Joseph Stalin in the 40s after it was banned in the first few decades of communism as an arm of the KGB. And so even in Ukraine for these past, 30 years, these churches were controlled by Russia. And now, only when Russia made the move to take over all of Ukraine are Ukrainians pushing back and taking back the churches. And the parallel with Israel is, we hear so often in the rhetoric of not just Hamas, but the Palestinian Authority about the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that's the Dome of the Rock, the famous Golden Dome in Jerusalem. And it's the third holiest site in Islam. But we see that mentioned all the time in the press. But the one thing that we don't see mentioned is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the single most holiest site in Judaism. It's on the ruins of the temple, which is the most holiest site in Judaism. And so often we see images of Jews praying at the Western Wall. That's the wall of their destroyed temple. And they're not allowed to go beyond that wall. They're strangers in their own land. And I've seen that here with Ukrainians. Until recently, the Lavra, the monastery of the caves, Ukrainian Orthodox were not permitted there. It was controlled by the Russians. They were strangers, the Ukrainians, in their own land. And it's the same in Israel. But if you look at the Israelis, were content to, for the most part, and certainly their government, were content to let the Muslims control the temple, which has been occupied really by the Islamic mosque for so many centuries. Sometimes it was a Christian church. The Jews have not had control of that site for a long time, but the Israelis were content to let that be and to keep the Jews say, okay, we will stay out of there, but we will have our country at least, and it'll be a democracy where you can be Jewish, Muslim, or Christian, but it will still be our home. And that's what the Ukrainians have said. You can speak Russian anywhere in Ukraine, even now. And they said, but we just want to live in freedom and make sure our culture is not erased. And so you do see these, even though different scenarios, but very strong parallels between the two stories. For sure.
Russian President Putin met with the country's business leaders yesterday, trying to encourage them to invest more in Russia. And I'm wondering how much pressure there is on him because of what's happening to the economy there. A third of Russia's spending next year, about $109 billion, is going to be devoted to national defense. And they're redirecting money that might otherwise have flowed to healthcare, education, roads, and other sectors. 6% of Russia's total output is being funneled toward the war machine right now, more than double what it was before the invasion. And do you think Putin is starting to feel that economic pressure?
Well, we see different takes on this because it also seems, Russia was not a flourishing society if you lived outside of Moscow or St. Petersburg. We've seen so many accounts of how amazed Russian soldiers were when they go to a Ukrainian village and to raid houses and they find these mysterious devices called iPads and iPhones. They didn't have that outside of their major cities. And so there's many analysts who think that the war has benefited Russia. It's given them a purpose and a meaning to disguise their own misery. And the government will give free cars to those who lose their family in battle. And you do see almost the same mentality of when you see the stories of Hamas, mothers and fathers who are proud that their sons have died as martyrs. And you see that same mentality from Russians. There really are. No wonder they're allies in this. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, we still have American companies like that one in Chicago, Mondelez, but many throughout the world who continue despite the it looks like there are sanctions, but nevertheless, businesses are still making lots of money in Russia.
Joseph Lindsley in Kyiv. Thanks, Joe. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you, Bob. Till tomorrow.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?